So it is my pleasure to welcome Ed Freeman, a new friend, who is a professor at Darden University of Virginia. He's a little bit of a Renaissance man, I think, because in addition to having a PhD in philosophy, he is a musician, plays many instruments. I don't know if we're going to get a little piece of that today. He's also a martial artist, and he said if you disagree with him, then he has a black belt, and I think can really do some damage. He's contributed to over 25 books and 150 articles. His new book, The New Story of Business, Purpose, Values, and Stakeholders, is out, and I know we're going to have an engaging session with him. So please join me in welcoming Ed Freeman.
Well, first of all, I wouldn't do any damage, but second of all, I'd have to catch you, and I have artificial hips. So that's highly unlikely if that were true. I was a little nervous when they started playing Highway to Hell a couple of songs ago. I wasn't sure exactly where that was going. And then it turned into Journey, one of my all-time least favorite songs. And my band was playing at a wedding, and we don't really do weddings. These were students, and they said, I said, if you want us to play a song for you, these were students we like, we can play anything, it's fine. He said, well, there's a song by Journey. So I don't know what that is, because I don't know any songs past 1980. And so I called my son, who's a musician, and I said, he wants to play this Journey song. He said, oh, sorry, it's 164.5. That's musician talk. And I said, what about the lyrics? He said, don't worry, the crowd will supply them. And that is exactly what happened. It was great. Well, I want to thank you for allowing me to talk with you today. And I'm going to spend a few minutes talking in the beginning, then I've figured out a way to get you to do most of the work in the session, as we professors like to do. It's a real honor to be here, as I sat here yesterday and this morning, to be in the room with a group of people whose purpose is absolutely aligned with my own and the kind of work I've been trying to do for the last 40 years or so. That's a real blessing to me, and I really appreciate that. And I want to have a conversation about what this idea means in terms of, I'm calling it creating and inspiring responsible leaders, but I'm happy with moral and inclusive leaders. I'm happy with ethical leaders. But it's interesting. I'm trying to write a book with a friend of mine who's at Oxford, is a Plato scholar. It's on Plato and leadership. And Plato didn't have an idea of ethical leadership. And the reason he didn't, this is 2,500 years ago or so, was leadership for Plato is contrasted with the tyrant. You were a tyrant or you were a leader. And that assumed some ideas about ethics. Now, Plato had a bunch of different ideas about what ethics was and how leaders fit in. But there was no such thing as an unethical leader. You were simply a tyrant. And that seems to me to be a conversation we might need in our society today about what's a tyrant and what to do about them. I want to make the problem of moral and inclusive leadership, however, a little more difficult for you. It's not just something that we have to do on the inside. Every scandal, you see everyone here, I've traced them back to the Teapot Dome scandal in the 20s. After every scandal, you can predict the op-eds. We need more integrity. We need more ethics in business. It's there without a doubt. It's like this. It's like they got it on a Rolodex would date me. They got it on some sort of electronic spool, and they just print it whenever there's a scandal, right? The problem is there's a context here. And the context is as important as thinking about personal integrity. We live in a world in which the dominant story about business is a story about money and shareholders and self-interest and so-called tough leadership. You hear it every day. We have a president that talks about essentially shafting suppliers. We have shareholder activists that talk about putting good companies like Whole Foods up for sale. We have executives who talk about trading off shareholder value with how much you pay employees. But it's even more subtle than this. You see it all over in how business is portrayed in the media. A friend of mine says, I haven't seen the study, so this is secondhand. A friend of mine said something like on network TV, 81% or so of the murders committed are committed by business people. In reality, it's like 1%. My favorite example that some of you are going to be old enough to get this. Remember the Flintstones? Remember Mr. Slate? Mr. Slate was Fred Flintstone's boss. He was the biggest doofus in the cartoon world. That's what it took to be a successful business person, etc. And if you combine that with two things, one, what I would call the 70% problem. You all know this, the idea that 70% of people or more in the U.S., and we're pretty good at it, 70% or more people are unengaged or actively unengaged in their jobs. Now, I guess it's about 50% they're just unengaged, okay? They just don't care. But what about the 20% who are actively unengaged? I mean, these are people who show up every day try to screw it up. Now, we expect that in the university. I mean, that's part of it. But you all have real jobs, and that's a different thing. And, of course, if you look around at how many people trust you as senior executives or people that work with senior executives, you find that number to be less than 20% in most places. So if there's this dominant story, and here, let me just give you the short form of it. Business is a bunch of greedy little bastards out trying to do each other in. It's all about self-interest, and you want people to do something, you got to incentivize them and pay them. And incentivize them to work together, etc., etc. Something's wrong. 70% of people are unengaged. 80% of the public don't trust business. It's not just about having more and better leadership. Yes, it's about that, and it's about changing the story of business in which that leadership is enmeshed. Now, there are lots of things wrong with this story, and I've clearly put it up as a straw person here. But there's some truth in this, and I want to talk about at least 3 mistakes, and you're all familiar with these. The first thing is a mistake about purpose. One of the biggest mistakes we make is to talk about the purpose of business is to make money. The purpose of business is shareholder value. There's only one place where entrepreneurs start a business to make as much money as they can. That's in business school textbooks and economics textbooks. They may do it there. Real entrepreneurs, and you know this, start a business because they're on fire about something. Bill Gates is on fire about the computer revolution. My friend John Mackey's on fire about bringing good food for people to eat. I have a friend who started a small business, a restaurant and wine shop in Charlottesville, on fire about bringing French country cooking to a small community. My son and I have a record label. We're on fire about bringing the joy of Motown and Stax in the 21st century. Yes, you got to make money. I need red blood cells to live. But it doesn't follow, on pain of just logical mistake that Aristotle wouldn't have made, that the purpose of my life is to make red blood cells. Who wants on their tombstone, made red blood cells? I haven't met anybody. I've never met anybody who got up in the morning and said, yeah, let me go out there and make money for those shareholders. I mean, maybe you know people like that. I'm certain there may be some. But purpose is something that's very different. Think of the places you visited yesterday. Was anybody trying to make as much money as they could? My sense is they weren't. What I try to say to my students all the time is, look, if you want to make money, get a job, because it's unlikely you're going to make much as an entrepreneur. A friend of mine has a restaurant in Copenhagen that's very famous, and he said, look, we didn't start this because we're going to make as much money as possible, because we didn't make any for the first 19 years. Now, they've made plenty since, but profit's an outcome, and we have to see it as an outcome. Alex Gorski said as much about J&J yesterday, about seeing listing shareholder value as last, and seeing if you take care of these other stakeholders, then shareholder value is an outcome. There's a mistake about purpose that's in this whole story. There's a mistake about business ethics. I tell people I teach business ethics, and you know what they say. See, some of you laughing already, like, dude, that's not polite. They go, I didn't know business had any. They go, oxymoron, 2 words, you put them together, contradiction. I used to say, because I went to Duke, I used to say Duke football, but I don't say that quite anymore, being at Virginia. Or, Postal Service, or whatever your favorite oxymoron. Jumbo shrimp is my favorite oxymoron. Or, business ethics, that must be a short course. Or one I heard in a bar in Copenhagen, I think it was it's a theoretical subject. And of that phrase, business ethics, we only screw up 2 of the words. First of all, business. Like I said, we got this dominant idea about business, about making money. It's about the physics of money. It's about competing, et cetera, et cetera. Every business person in the room knows that's not how you run a successful business. You run a successful business, even if you want to make as much money as possible, what do you have to do? You got to have great products and services to make customers' lives better so they buy them. You got to have suppliers who want to make you better because it makes them better. You got to have employees who are actually engaged, show up, can innovate, can serve customers. You better be a good citizen in the community, or in a free society, the community will pass some regulation to keep you from doing what you want to do, and you do those things, you're going to make money. Right? So we get this idea about what a successful business is wrong. Business is not figuring out how to find loopholes in the law, create a bunch of stuff in the short term with government, sign these big deals that eventually go bang. Oh, I'm just going too far with that. It's something else. It's about creating value for stakeholders. And we got this idea that ethics, again, I tell people I teach ethics. And if somebody interesting you want to talk to, they have to suddenly find themselves, I've got to go watch some paint dry. Or I've got to go wash my hair a couple of 100 times. Or, this idea that ethics is this stuff that you talk about on Sunday, on the Sabbath, in hushed tones. My greatest teacher ever was Socrates. And Socrates talked about how we should live. Ethics about how we should live. How what I do affects you and how what you do affects me. It's a conversation about how we're going to live together. People often say, look, I got to decide. I got to look myself in the mirror. I have to live with myself. And that is actually true. You do have to live with yourself. Unfortunately, we have to live with you too. And, we can always, strongest wins. We can always try to kill each other, and the winner gets their ethics, and we see that too much in the world today. Or we can have a conversation about how we thrive together. Ethics is a substitution of reason and conversation for violence, and we need more of that, not less. I'm most distressed by the people who always know the right thing to do, because that shuts conversation down. It doesn't open it up. So we make a mistake about purpose, we make a mistake about ethics, and it's probably true the biggest mistake, and I'm just embarrassed to say this, but I hope I can get a chorus of amens here. We make a mistake about what a human being is. we have this idea, and it was best described by this crusty old guy at Harvard Business School named Harry Levinson. Levinson was this Freudian psychologist, so that means I don't know what generation was before the baby boomers, the greatest generation, or the old fart generation. I don't know what it was, but that's what he was. And he'd walk into the classroom and go, what's the way motivation works in most corporations? And people would say, rewards and punishments. In fact, I've asked them exactly the same question today, and they say exactly the same thing. Rewards and punishments, carrots and sticks. And then Levinson would draw on the board a little mechanism like this, and now I'm proving that my daughter, who's an artist, got nothing from me. So this is the carrot and this is the stick. And he would say, what animal do you imagine between a carrot and a stick? Somebody said rabbit. That's messed up. Beat a rabbit with a stick. Some people said donkey. Levinson used to say, most people would say jackass. So he coined this idea that I think is brilliant. A paper in the 1950s called the Great Jackass Fallacy. The Great Jackass Fallacy that says essentially, maybe, just maybe, human beings are slightly more complex than jackasses. Maybe they have spiritual, sexual, social, political, moral lives, and they're pretty complicated. And it's a little worse. Treat them like jackasses, and what happens? They start acting like jackasses. They start trying to get rewards and trying to avoid punishment. Dan Pink wrote a book called Drive, which some of you have seen, which totally debunks the idea of incentives, certainly in the 21st century. And so, the way I summarize it is to think for a minute about what this is, aside from an outdated iPhone 6. What this is, the way I see it, and it's the way I see business. This is some bits of metal, some bits of sand. The fact that we human beings can collaborate together and create vocabularies that solve our problems. That's what this is. When you think about it like this, the world is not a world of scarcity. The world is a world of abundance. But we have to change the way that we think about business. And we have to change it in our actions. Capitalism is, in my view, the greatest system of social cooperation we have ever invented. It's how we work together to create value in a way that no one of us could do it alone. And so when I listen to this narrative about it's all about competition and dog eat dog and those kind of things, look, some of my best friends are economists. I'm not stupid. Competition's important, gives people options in a free society. But the glue of capitalism is our desire to create for each other. You saw that yesterday. That is it's the most powerful urge, I think, on the face of the planet. And in fact, it's transformed the planet. We have transformed it almost to the point of ruin, not because we compete with each other, but because we cooperate with each other. We know how to work together. We know how to create value. We need to become conscious of that, and we need to do it better. Now, the good news, before I get you to do the work. The good news, this is happening in business. We are on the wave of a conceptual revolution in business. If you think since the 2007-2008 crisis, think for a minute about what we've had. We've had a renewed emphasis on corporate social responsibility around the world. I'm headed from here to Indonesia to work with a foundation whose companies are trying to get rid of dengue fever. We've had a renewed concern with sustainability. If you follow Paul Pullman, we knew the answers and got all those questions right too. I just want a plug for this side of the room. He tweets about the development goals and how it's affecting Unilever, etc., almost every day. So we've had an increase in the idea about corporate social responsibility and sustainability. I've been fortunate to hang out with some people like John Mackey and Kip Tyndall of the Container Store with a group they call Conscious Capitalism. There are groups around responsible capitalism, capitalism 2.0, just capitalism, responsible investing, impact investing, and of course, social entrepreneurship. If I look at the change, people ask me all the time, have your students changed? I've been doing this for like forever. It's all I really know how to do. And I said, well, I don't know if my students have changed through the generations. I know I'm older. You know, the students whine more now. I don't know. I just got less patience for it. You know, that I'm pretty sure. But one thing that has changed, my students are roughly 27 to 30, so they're millennials, and I happen to have 3 of my own. They're very open about, yes, want to make money, yes, want to make the world a better place. And guess what? I don't think that's just a function of millennials or Gen Y or whatever. I'll bet everybody in this room wants to create meaning in their lives, do something good that makes the world a little better than they found it, and you got to make red blood cells. We have a saying in the music business, everybody got to get paid. You know, as hard as that often is. And literally this revolution is sweeping the world, from big companies like Unilever and others to companies that have grown up this way, like Whole Foods and the Motley Fool and the Container Store and Patagonia, etc., to companies that are just starting. You see this happening, and you see it happening all over the world. I spent some time in the Netherlands, our last speaker, and every time I go, I meet with students who are starting green, sustainable, responsible companies. And so part of the issue of responsible leadership is thinking about this old story of business and how it changes. There's some principles in this new story that I think are important. Purpose matters. Ethics and values is at least as important as profits. Stakeholders are the unit of analysis, and they're interdependent. There are no trade-offs here. Figure out how to get customers, suppliers, employees, communities, and shareholders going in the same direction. I get accused all the time of being anti-shareholder value. Let me just tell you, I'm the biggest fan of shareholder value in the world. I have 3 children, a musician, an artist, and one who's saving the world. I'll be working forever. and that's good. They're great kids, and I love them, and I'll do whatever I can for them. But I'd like someday, when I'm older and more crotchety, to retire, and I need some investments to pay off. So I'm a big fan of shareholder value. They're important. Setting up the dichotomy of shareholders versus stakeholders, or shareholders versus purpose, is as damaging as saying it's just shareholders. Has to be both. This stuff it is the business model. How you create value for stakeholders just is your business model. Now, let's become aware of how we're doing it so we can pour the coals to it and increase the value that we can create for all of them. And of course, the other principles that people are complicated. When you realize roughly these principles, I think we can begin to see capitalism for what it is, a great system of social cooperation. And then the question becomes, how do we empower people that have not had much access here? It's as Muhammad Yunus said, as he's created thousands of entrepreneurs in Bangladesh, poor people aren't dumb, they just don't have any money. And so how we empower them, how we empower people who've been denied access for whatever reason, primarily because of the old story, is something we have to take, I think, very seriously. Now, what I'd like to do is to have you at your tables talk about these ideas and basically to ask yourself the following question. What do you see at your table as the core elements of responsible leadership? We're going to be talking about, or moral and inclusive leadership, whatever your favorite term is for this, and I like them all. Okay? what do you see at your table? Let's take about 5 or 10 minutes to this, and this is the part where I'm done and you start to talk. And then we'll share our findings here. So I think I've just proven that the world is a world of abundance. It's a world of abundance of human hope and of love. We don't talk much about the role of love in business, but if I'm right, capitalism is actually built on our idea to create and care for each other, and we need to put that at the center. I get asked all the time, give us the bottom line, give us the takeaways, you know, and I'm going to give you two rules. One is called the Warren Haynes rule. Warren Haynes is a great blues guitarist, played with the Allman Brothers and the Warren Haynes Band, and etc. And I'm trying to learn how to play slide guitar, which sounds like, when you learn to play slide guitar, sounds like you're killing a cat very slowly with intent to harm. And I'm trying to do this. It sounds awful. And Warren Haynes on the tape, I noticed him saying, now see, when you play the blues, it doesn't really matter how many notes you play. You just have to mean the notes that you play. If you ever heard B.B. King play that one note pull-off, where there's more meaning he creates in that one note than I could create the rest of my life, you get what he's saying. Life comes at you very fast now. It comes at me fast. I don't have a real job. It comes at you fast. And you have to figure out, what are the notes worth playing? Or else you'll get caught up and the tombstone looks like, played a lot of notes. Not very interesting. And the last thing is very straightforward, no surprise, Ben, Em, and Molly rule. Ben, Em, and Molly are names of my kids. Ben's the oldest, Em and Molly are twins. So if you had your children one at a time, I'm like not impressed. And Ben, Em, and Molly rule says, at the end of the day, can I go home and say to Ben, Em, and Molly, let me tell you what I did today. Let me tell you what I did today I'm proud of. I want you to learn from. Because if we're not trying to make our organizations places for our children to live in, we've got the bar too low. We have to make our companies, certainly our governments, our churches, synagogues, and mosques, our creative arts organizations, our universities, we got to make them places for our children to live in. That's the bar that understanding and fostering moral and inclusive and responsible leadership, that's where the bar is. It's been a real treat to have a little time with you today, and I really wish you the best. Thank you very much.